Hello, everyone. I am so excited to see you today on another fabulous the Grove. It's actually not Licio, the Grove live events today. And today we're going to talk about dealing with overwhelm in your firm. This is something that I frequently hear from practitioners across the country and, well, actually around the world. And we have asked Leslie Liondas, who is the very successful owner of a pretty large firm, to come, and a CPA in her own right, to come and help us understand how she deals with overwhelm in her firm and give you her best tips and tricks. So Leslie, without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to you. And folks, we're going to be using the Q&A today for any questions that you have. And I'm going to be happy to be in the background answering them for you. So thank you, Leslie. Take it away.
All right. So what we're going to talk about today is actually dealing with overwhelm in your firm. And I've also, as Allison said, I've talked to a lot of practitioners as well, that where they also, it is overlapping between firm and their personal life. So we're going to kind of talk about both of them as well. But first off, I'm going to talk about who I am for those of you that don't know me. I am the mother of 2 grown daughters, and I'm the owner of Leslie Liondas CPA since 2014. And I'm passionate about helping other accountants and bookkeepers and tax pros build their ideal practice. And one of the things that most people don't know about me is I love traveling and exploring new places by just looking at the map. So I'll literally throw a dart at the map and figure out where I want to go from there. So that's how I love to travel. So, but we're going to talk today about overwhelm. And when I was researching to do this, when Allison asked me to do this presentation, I first thought, well, what is overwhelm and what are the symptoms? Because I know what I feel when I get overwhelmed, but trying to figure out what others actually feel at the same time is also key. So when I was doing my research, this is kind of what I came up with. So if you know some of this stuff, just kind of bear with me a little bit. But one of the biggest things is when I did this survey in my own Facebook group about what they do when they trigger overwhelm, I got some really great answers. So I wanted to kind of throw that in here. And then they also gave me some ways to control it. And all things lead back to overwhelm is what I am so passionate about is getting stuff out of your head. And then what are glass balls versus plastic balls? And so if you'll stay with me through that, we'll talk about that. And then when do you know you actually need support when you're feeling this overwhelm? Because as an accountant myself, we all figure out that we can do this thing with us. We can do it together. But when you try to do everything yourself, you don't know when to actually ask for support. Because as accountants, we're horrible at asking for support when we need it. So what is actual overwhelm? So the best definition I got is to overpower in thought or feeling. And that's the way a lot of people, they have this feeling of thought where their mind is going over and over and over when we're analyzing stuff to death. And that's where a lot of times we get this overwhelming feeling, is because it's in our thoughts. And so if you think about it, when you're overwhelmed, where do you normally find yourself being? Is it in the thought or feeling? Because a lot of it is when we have a lot of stuff on our mind, that's when we start feeling overwhelmed. So some of the emotional symptoms of overwhelm are, do you find that your mood changes? And this came straight from my Facebook group of things that they felt when they were feeling overwhelmed. And I did some other thing with other practitioners that they just said they start becoming pessimistic. Like things just have to be this way. They start withdrawing from people where they don't want to do things that they normally love to do. And then they have irrational thoughts. And a lot of and I kind of thought that was kind of funny on irrational thoughts, but a lot of them got stuck in their own way because I can't change anything. I can't do this because my clients won't do it. And then a lot of times we overreact. And I'll talk about how overreacting is compared to water in a little bit. And then just mentally tired. A lot of practitioners, that's where they're so overwhelmed in their business that they're just mentally exhausted. And then unfortunately, some of this leads to depression where you just really just don't want to do it anymore. And then I was looking at some of the physical symptoms of overwhelming, and it's increasing their heartbeat, difficulty breathing, dizziness. And then I talked to some that's like they get bad migraines. And at the first of the month, sometimes they have worse headaches than they normally do because they have a tight deadlines. And then I've talked to tax practitioners who have migraines throughout the whole month of April, upset stomach and more. So these are all physical symptoms that you could be experiencing with overwhelm. But what are some of the triggers? So this is where I found it really interesting when I was doing my research on this, is a lot of accountants have trouble asking for help. And so that triggers overwhelm because they try to figure everything out themselves. They have a fear of change because they're afraid that their clients won't change the way if they've always done something a certain way, but there's a better way to do it. They fear that. So they keep doing the same thing, but it keeps going into putting them in overwhelm mode because they're still doing a lot of stuff manually. And right now in our world, there's so much unknown in our industry, in the world, with our clients. And I know there's been a whole lot of talk of recession. And so since we deal with other people's stuff, we have that same fear in our own businesses, plus our clients' businesses, because if our clients are successful, it comes back to us as well, because then we've lost a client. So all of these are fears that trigger the overwhelm. And then I've talked to so many team practitioners that want to hire a team, but it triggers overwhelm in training them and always needing to know the answer. So some of these, I'm hoping that some of these are some of the same things that you're facing in your own firm, because I really tried to go out and figure out what they actually are. So, and some of them also said that they feel inadequate. They have guilt because they haven't, when they're overwhelmed, they don't feel like they've given the service that they want to provide to their clients. They feel rushed. They have lack of knowledge. And a lot of it's not lack of knowledge, a lot of it's confidence. So whenever you are feeling like you don't have the knowledge, but then is it confidence that you actually need to actually get it done? And then you get distracted, and so therefore that triggers overwhelm. So I had a client tell me, well, my kids are always distracting me. Well, have you put the boundaries in? Because your kids shouldn't be distractions. They should actually be part of why you do what you do. So maybe we need to look at boundaries and different things. And then a lot of practitioners are just stuck, especially with what has been going on with the tax world and with just COVID and just everything. They're just stuck. And so all of this triggers overwhelm. And then when you have that client that you don't feel values you, or you're working for somebody that doesn't feel like you value you, that triggers overwhelm because you feel like that you're not actually providing what you actually are meant to provide. So when you're feeling this way, it can trigger overwhelm. So how many of you feel like this person right here, you have all this energy in your head? Well, that's what triggers overwhelm and makes you feel like that you just can't move on any forward. So some of the other causes of overwhelm, I know there's a ton of people that you plan for what you're going to do for the day, but it doesn't go that way because we're in constant interruption mode. You have a client that all of a sudden needs what you have, but you weren't expecting to do it that day. And then many of us are trying to please everyone, from our family to our clients to our team to anybody else in between. And then we're dealing with clients that don't value us. And so therefore it makes it really hard to get past this overwhelm. And as we have questions we have clients asking us questions all day long. We have family asking us questions all day long. And we just literally feel like this lady right here at the end of the day, like you just can't do any more. And a lot of it's because we're trying to please everyone, and we keep taking on more and more because we can't say no. And why is it we can't say no? And a lot of it is because we're naturally helpers and pleasers, and we want to please people. So we just keep doing it until we are the cause of it. So we have never-ending to-do lists. And I know if a lot of practitioners feel like they don't ever get anything accomplished, that to-do list just keeps growing. And I did a talk on this in Dallas and San Antonio last week. And that was the number one thing they said is that they feel like they didn't accomplish anything when they were trying to get their work done, that they would look at their to-do list and there was nothing they could take off of it because the plan that they had didn't work. So it wasn't so much the lack of planning, it was lack of sticking to the plan. And then too many commitments. There's only 24 hours in a day. So a lot of times we build out our day where we have too much for the day. And then I know imposter syndrome is real because we feel like we need to know more than we actually do before we can actually move to the next level. And a lot of times we already know it, we just don't have the confidence. So a lot of things that leads to overwhelm is confidence, is that we don't have confidence in our abilities, in ourselves, and our team. And so when you have that confidence, a lot of the overwhelm goes away. And the voices in our head, and when somebody gave me this response, voices in my head, I was like, what do you mean by that? But it's all the self-doubt, and that self-doubt builds into overwhelm. So back what I was saying with confidence. So when you have all these voices in your head telling you you're not good enough, that triggers your overwhelm. So that's where you have to I call mine negative Nadine, and I just tell her, now you got to be quiet and just hold on because we're just going to do this. So if we can get past all these negative voices, we can start dealing with the overwhelm. So I know a lot of people feel like this when they're working, like they have these Post-it notes everywhere. And so when you're working in a state of chaos, it develops overwhelm in your work. So these are some of the ways that I came up with to control it, plus the community that I asked these questions to. So one of the ways was music, and I'm going to talk about each one of these individually because the way I do it and the way you do it may be just completely different. So with music and then journaling, exercise, I know we hear this all day long and that we need to get up and move more, but I've been practicing this in my own life as well, and it works. And then I know we have tons of reading we want to do, but do we actually take the time to do it? Well, that's one way that you can start building confidence and actually controlling it. And then flat out meditating, breathing exercises. And then I go to a happy place in my mind when I'm starting to feel overwhelmed, and I'm going to share where that place is. So the first thing I want to talk about is actual music, training your brain. So what does music mean to train your brain? So when I need to work on something specifically and my brain is going in 500,000 different directions, I can use a certain playlist to make my brain stop. And this took time, but every time I needed my brain to do something, I literally will listen to Dolly Parton, and I will put that on and make myself listen to that and then get that stuff done. And what I've done to do is train my brain to focus on that music. And it really does work. So if you could think of a playlist that works, can you train your brain to actually do that? And I also have a different playlist that I just use to just tune out the world and tune out the voices and tune out everything else. So music really does train my brain to do those things. And then everybody talks about journaling. And I recently challenged a client to journal on what was making her feel overwhelmed. And it wasn't what she really felt overwhelmed about to start with. It was all the other things. So when you journal, and a lot of people say, well, I don't know what to journal on. Well, when you're feeling overwhelmed, your question is, what is making me feel overwhelmed? So when I challenge my clients to do this, they find out what they're overwhelmed about has actually nothing to do with work. It is about something else. So this is a safe place to get the thoughts out of your head. And once they're out of your head, you can quit analyzing them in your head. So for example, when you're trying to make a decision about your business, and I'll use myself as an example, I was trying to make a decision about whether to go 100% remote or stay in our current office. Well, I got tired of thinking about it over and over because it was just overwhelming me to make the decision. So I started journaling about it, and it helped me make a decision on which way to go. And so I was able to write out the pros and cons of doing both things. So that way it was a safe place for me to do it. And I didn't have to overwhelm anybody on my team or family or anything, because I just was able to be in my own thoughts. So journaling to me is one of the most powerful things that you can do in your business in order to help you make decisions. And then exercise. So I did some research on exercise and what it does to your body, but it pumps up endorphins in your body and it reduces the negative effects of stress. It will improve your mood. So I have found whenever I go for a 10-minute walk when I'm feeling just overwhelmed, that it puts me in a better frame of mind, because then I just let it go. And back to, I'll listen to music. So I'm exercising and listening to music, or I'm listening to that podcast that I've been wanting to listen to for a long time. And so when I was actually going to the gym faithfully every day at 2:00, not only did it build a habit, but I was able to actually get some more stuff done after I got done exercising, because it revitalized me. And then I wasn't feeling overwhelmed, and I was able to take on those extra things that I wanted to take on. And then reading. I have heard so many accountants say, I have such a big read list and I never read. Well, what if you could just read 20 minutes per day? And I had a mentor that challenged me on this. He's like, if you read 20 minutes per day, how can it improve your mood and your creativity? Because when you're reading books like Patrick Lencioni that makes you think a little bit differently, it also makes you become more creative and it improves your mood. And I know so many accountants, their reading list is pages and pages long. So, but what happened if you just did it and for 20 minutes you focused on nothing but that book? And I will caution you on this, because sometimes my 20 minutes will turn into an hour and 20 minutes. So I do have to set a timer so that way I know how long I'm reading. But planning to read every single day can calm and slow your mind down. So that way you're not thinking about with all those open tabs. And then meditating and breathing. So whenever I feel overwhelmed and just like everybody seems to want something from me, I will shut everything down and just focus on my breathing and count. And I will count my breath and I will set a timer for 10 minutes. And then if I'm not better after that 10 minutes, I will repeat it if I need to do it longer. But I will do this sitting in front of my computer with all my screens off. So I don't even have to go anywhere. Because sometimes it's just easier if I'm in my home office, if people don't even know that I'm not doing anything, I'm just breathing for 10 minutes, especially when you have that client that just irritates the living daylights out of you, that you just need to focus and clear your mind. So that way you can actually go on. And so I told you earlier, we're going to talk about going to my happy place. This is Hilton Head Beach, which is my happy place. So whenever I'm feeling overwhelmed, I just think of what it took to get here, to stay and be on Hilton Head Island. And I can literally hear the waves. I can hear the seagulls. I can feel the water on my feet. And this is what I do when I start feeling overwhelmed, is I'll look at a picture of Hilton Head and think what that felt like for about 10 minutes. And then all of a sudden the overwhelming is gone. So these are just some of the quick things that I will do when I just feel overwhelmed to actually start getting in my place of where I want to be. And so I talked earlier about they cross over between business and personal. So if you think about your business life, when you're overwhelmed in your business, you're snappy with your family, you're snappy with your friends. And we talked about not wanting to be in another place where you don't want to deal with people, because we deal with people all day long, but it crosses over to personal. When you're feeling overwhelmed before vacation, you're very snappy. And so these cross over. So when you think about how you respond when you're interrupted in your workday by your family. So for those of you that are working remote, if you think your daughter walks in the room, how do you snap at her when she interrupts you? Or how do you respond to the clients when distracted? I did a survey with with a couple of my clients, and I asked, what is the accounting industry missing? And his response was, quit responding to my emails when you're distracted. And he was talking about his tax preparer. He's like, he responds to me at 11:30 at night, and he knows that, number one, I'm not going to respond directly to him, but he also said, but I also know I'm getting a half response. He's not really thinking it through because he's responding to me at 11:30 at night. I need a fuller thought out response. So think about when you're responding to clients that it's because we all have everything on our phone. Are you doing it when your daughter or your son is talking to you? So you're given a half thought response, because then that is overwhelming our clients, and that is what's dealing. And then our clients overwhelm us. So we go back and forth with that same email. And then how do you respond to your team when you are overwhelmed with everything that you need to do for your family or everything you're needing to do for your firm? So these go hand in hand. So I know we all talk about work-life balance, but right now, with a lot of people still working at home, they're absolutely crossing boundaries. And even when if you're in an actually office, your spouse calls you and you're distracted, you're not going to give it your full attention because you're going to start feeling overwhelmed. So now we're going to talk about ways to control it, because I know I felt like this pile of rocks and there was just like a feather just holding it up. And so this is how we're going to try to control it. So I am so passionate about getting stuff out of your head, because this actually was transformational for my firm, was getting not only stuff out of my head, but actually out of my team's head as well. Because whenever we're talking about our clients and we have a team member leave, that leads to overwhelm, because then we're trying to get all that stuff out of people's heads. So if we talk about what is in your head, there's so much information that we are probably on information overload. And when I did this presentation before, I talked about what was in people's head, and this was some of the stuff that they gave me. They have all their client and their customer information in their head. So whenever the owner is the only one that has that, that leads to overwhelm, because then you're the answer to everybody's stuff. And then what you need to do after this webinar or after this class, those are the things that are living in your head. And I tasked people when I did this live, I gave them out a notebook and I told them, write down what you are thinking about right now, and then shut the notebook. So when they did, we came back to it 10 minutes later, they had forgotten what was in that notebook. So that's how important getting things out of your head is. And then all the client and customer items that you've discussed in meeting lives in your head. So when you're thinking about this relating to overwhelm, this becomes part of you're the answer to everything that everybody needs. So that triggers your overwhelm. And then all the knowledge that you've learned over the years, if you don't have a way to filter that and put that into a system, you actually lose it. And then all the knowledge you've gotten from your clients over the years, as you grow your practice, you can't continue to have things in your head, because people need that information. And then when you add on what's living in your personal head, like if you're thinking, I've got to make my daughter a doctor's appointment, I got to make my daughter's a doctor's appointment over and over in your head, well, that deals to overwhelm, because then you're trying to make sure you remember that. So then you have all of this stuff in your overwhelmed head. And then all the things that you need to do when you get home next weekend, next week, and then all the schedules that we have going on in our head, if we would get those out of our head, we're not constantly thinking about them. And then when you're not constantly thinking about them, that takes away the overwhelm. So I know a lot of people feel like this throughout their day, like, I just can't take on another thing. And so one of my clients literally told me, I have like 50 open tabs in my brain at any given moment. And I was like, are you overwhelmed? And she goes, to say the least. And I'm like, well, what if you close those open loops? Would that help you? And she's like, absolutely. So I'm like, okay, get a piece of paper and start just writing it out, or do it on a Google sheet, an Excel sheet, wherever you need to do, get it out. So she did. And she's like, I just feel like I've literally closed 50 tabs. Because if you think about when you have all those tabs open on your computer, our brains are the same way. So I talked earlier about getting minds like water and how water responds. So if you think about like a hurricane, or when it's a really windy day on a lake, and water responds to it, and it responds in the force and the mass of the input. So the more wind you have, the more the water responds. So thinking about overwhelm is the same thing. when you're thinking about overwhelm and putting it together with water, that's how we respond. So if water is calm and smooth like glass, do we overreact? Most of the time it's no. So when your brain is not overreacting, then it's actually just calm. And so can you see how these two can go together? So when somebody brought this to my attention, when I read this book, Getting Things Done by David Allen, and I really started thinking about this, whenever I was overwhelmed, I responded like a hurricane. So if you can slow how you respond down, then you can actually start responding like a smooth lake like glass. But it goes back to getting stuff out of your head and getting the overwhelm under control and identifying triggers. So clearing your mind to be open and appropriately responsive is key, because a lot of times whenever we respond inappropriately, it also triggers a downhill effect. So then that triggers for overwhelm, because then our kids are mad at us, our spouse is mad at us, our team are mad at us. But if we learn how to control the triggers and what causes us to overreact to things, we can actually close that loop, having to solve that too. So then therefore that doesn't have that overwhelming feeling. And do you give your full attention to what you need to in life? So I know when I had my kids were younger, I would hear literally the Charlie Brown teacher, because I had all these things going on in my mind. And so when I would get them out of my mind, I didn't hear the Charlie Brown teacher anymore, because we're not thinking of that never-ending to-do list. So back to those triggers. This is one of the best quotes of David Allen. If your mind is empty, it is always ready for anything. It is open for everything. So if you think about when you're feeling overwhelmed, you're not ready for anything at all. You are absolutely stuck. But when you get your mind to a place of emptiness, then you're not. And that's by getting stuff controlled. So we have to talk about what holds us back. We have everything coming in from everywhere. So we have emails coming in, we have Slack messages, team messages, phone calls, text messages. But if you streamlined where a lot of those stuff is coming in, so for example, in my firm, all of our client communication comes in through Listio. So none of it comes in through email. So therefore, that takes that out of the equation. So email is not as important. So email doesn't overwhelm us, because all client communication is done within Listio. And then, so if you think about and close those loops of where information is coming in, that can help you with the overwhelm. So what holds us back from getting stuff out of our head? The number one answer, and when I presented this live, was they have no time and they're the bottleneck of work. Those were the number one answers in 3 presentations, because they have so much going on. But we're going to talk about glass balls versus plastic balls in a little bit. And a lot of times the reason we don't have time is because we're doing the wrong thing, or we have the wrong system, or we have too many systems, or we don't have one that we trust. And we actually just don't even know where to start, because a lot of people just want to put it in the system and they don't have an idea of where to actually start with the system, because then you have to implement the system and you have to train people in the system. And then it just goes into a whole lot of other things. So if we don't know where to start, that's part of the problem. But the way I challenge that is you can just do it on a simple Google sheet, because things rarely get stuck because of lack of time. They get stuck because what doing would look like and where it happened hasn't been decided. So that's where I would talk about a lot of technology, because a lot of people get stuck in the technology when something can be just solved with a Google sheet or an Excel sheet. That's all that, because you can make a to-do list in one of those. That's it. And so how do we actually get the stuff out of our head? So tasks, what to do, business and personal, because they go together. And then how to do our processes, personal and business. So a lot of people get overwhelmed because they don't know how to do something. I know a lot of times we only do stuff yearly, Well, then we have to go back and remember how to do it. So that takes up a lot of the time. But if we actually develop out our processes where we're not having to do that, or where we can easily delegate it, that makes it so much easier. So this is the stuff we need to get out of our head to get being so overwhelmed. Because a lot of times the reason we're overwhelmed is because we're answering never-ending questions that can be solved by these two things. And yes, they take time to get out of your head. But if you never start, you'll never get there. Because we need to put all of this stuff in an actual clear inventory. So when I first started doing this journey several years ago, I tried task management system after task management system after task management system. And I ended up with these two pictures because I still didn't trust the system. I had to get it into a system that worked. So like I talked about with Liscio, with us using Liscio, it made where that client communication center, that's where everything lived. When we need a client to do something, it lived in Liscio. It didn't live anywhere else. It didn't live on our desk. It didn't live on Post-it notes. So getting tasks out of your head, you have to get the can't out of it. And I can attest to this. I used to think there was things in my firm that only I could do. And that is absolute bullcrap, because you can train a team member to do anything that's in your head with the right system and the right process. So I talked earlier about how easy it is to get the stuff out of people's head. And so this is an example of when we need to do it, the client or the firm, what the task is, what the priority level is, the due date, because you can filter an Excel sheet or a Google sheet to keep up with this. This is just an easy way. And then when you find that perfect task management system, all you gotta do is copy and paste. So this is all I started with. And then whether we needed a process on it or not. So for example, if we have ABC client's payroll that is due on the 5th, ABC's here, payroll, that is a high priority thing when it's due. And then what team members to do it, and do we need a process on it? If you're starting out with no processes, yes, you need a process. And as you build out these, you can put a Google link in here to where it started. So this gets you started, so you don't have to overthink the actual sheet. And then how to get the how-to out of your head. So I've talked to so many practitioners and they're like, oh my God, this is so overwhelming. I just can't even think about it. But I literally did a little each day. I didn't get there by just saying, I'm gonna take a week and do nothing but processes. Well, then I'd get behind on everything else. So I did a little every day. So my best time to work on this stuff was first thing in the morning before anything else derailed my day. So I would block out an hour on my calendar and that's all I would do. And I would get just started. And then I also made my team do the exact same thing where we were on the same page. And then we would have a weekly team meeting around what the priorities were. So that way they knew which ones they were. Because when we were doing ours, they were in summer, getting the processes documented. So year-end tasks were not important at the time. Payroll, month-end bookkeeping, and the stuff we had going on right then, that was the important stuff. So this was an example sheet of how we identified once we got what we needed to do, then we started, this is the processes needed. We assign them to people, we assign testers, the date we assign them. And then because the testers part is the most critical part, because if you don't have anybody test your processes until somebody needs them, you're gonna have a hole. So I'll use an example. I had 2 people out on maternity leave and we had my admin testing bookkeeping processes in order to make sure that they didn't have holes. Because when you're the one doing all the work, you have holes in your system. So this part, being a tester and making people test processes and move stuff around, is one of the most important parts. Because what triggers overwhelm is the inconsistency of stuff. So if you think about, if Nicole does her clients like this, but Becky does her clients like this, the clients are getting inconsistent results, which causes you overwhelm because the client's like, I didn't get used to get it like this before, but that's where we need to go. So we need to get that out so everybody's doing things the same exact way. And especially with all the special innuendos with certain clients, that way you get it out of your head. So I talked earlier about a glass ball and a plastic ball. So if you think about this with overwhelm, what things are overwhelming you that are glass balls? Like you drop them, it's going to break. You're going to lose the client. You're going to lose the team member. Something is going to break if you drop that ball versus a plastic ball that's going to bounce and just go somewhere else. It's going to bounce and you can pick it up later. So when you think about that, what is your glass balls versus your plastic balls? Journal on this. So what are some of the things you can't drop? So I'll use an example of a payroll deadline can't be dropped. A 1099 deadline can't be dropped. But if you have your clients are not giving you the information you need, you can put that boundary in there and make it a plastic ball. So think about that. What are the glass balls you can't drop? And what are your priority level of those glass balls? Because a lot of times we have trouble making these different. Which ones are glass? Which ones are plastic? So like for me, my glass ball is making sure that my team has the processes that they need to complete the client work, where the client work gets it when they're supposed to. That's a glass ball for me. But a plastic ball may be doing the tax return process, tweaking the tax return process for next year. So I can drop that ball a few times before it becomes a glass ball. So then I put priority levels on the plastic ones and the glass ones. So hopefully this is helpful to actually think about it in this context, because we're trying to juggle all these balls, but which ones can we afford to drop? And so just making this, understanding this concept helped me be able to not get so overwhelmed and stuff. And when do you know you need support? So I've talked to so many accountants, bookkeepers, tax professionals, and they actually don't know when they need support because they think they have to know everything. And that is not necessarily true. So there's people that have gone through this before you. So lean into them for support. Don't think you have to do this all on your own. So just like this guy's asking for a helping hand, and that's one thing I'll say about the accounting community is they are so supportive of one another, even though we're all direct competitors, they're so supportive of each other that they will pretty much tell you anything that you want to know. So why are you trying to figure it out yourself? So, and this is one way to know that you need help, because you're asking for, you're overwhelmed and you're thinking of all these things on this clock and you don't have time. So you're trying to learn new things and you're trying to put out processes. You're trying to have these brainstorming moments. You're trying to collect money. You're building relationships. You're doing all these things, but how can you actually stop from all of this going on when you need support? So if you're trying to build out a marketing campaign, why try to figure it out on your own? Find people that can support you in it. So one of the ways that I analyze where my time goes is actually time tracking. So when I'm feeling overwhelmed and I'm trying to figure out, okay, am I working on glass balls or plastic balls, or none of them are even balls, they're just mush. So I'll do a time tracking, and not for billable purpose, but where does my time go? Where do I need support? Where am I getting stuck? Am I looking at stuff from a year ago trying to figure out how I did it? Where can I go get support, and what I actually need to learn, and whether or not you're doing what you're best suited for, and what can you delegate? So when I did my first time tracking, I realized I was doing all admin work. I was not doing any meaningful work. So when I was feeling overwhelmed, that was the reason, because I was just doing all the things that didn't matter to nobody, but they were all stuff because I was wearing all the hats. So when you actually analyze your time, you can start seeing, hey, I need to hire an admin person, and that's about 10 hours a week worth of work. I'm not saying hire a full-time person. Look at how long things are taking you. And same with your client work. Are you working on the client work you should be? Are you still reconciling bank statements and you shouldn't be reconciling bank statements? Because I know we love to get to the ultimate zero on those bank statements. Most accountants, they would love to do a good bank rec or a good cleanup. But is that the best use of your time? And if it is, great, but figure out what it is. And then analyze, are you over capacity? So I had one of my clients, she was thinking about hiring, and I'm like, let's do a time tracking, see where your time spent, see where your team's time is spent. Well, they weren't actually over capacity. They were doing all the wrong things. And so when they started looking at a lot of the work they needed to do, they actually didn't need to do a lot of the work they were actually doing. The clients didn't care. And are you procrastinating? So I know most accountants are the best procrastinators there are. You wait till the very end to actually procrastinate. So, because we don't have long periods to work, because back to the overwhelm cycle, you're sitting there going over and over in the overwhelm cycle, so you don't have long periods of work. So one of the things that I would do to keep myself from procrastinating is I would have one big project I was going to do for the day, and I would set a timer on my phone for 50 minutes, and I would not let myself get up for 50 minutes in order to get that done. And if you need to hire, what type of skill set do you need? You get all this from the time tracking. So if you're in Zoom meeting after Zoom meeting after Zoom meeting on sales calls, then you might need somebody that has that skill set. If you are on a client where you're going over financial forecasting or you're going over their financials, well, then you need somebody with that skill set. So look at what kind of skill sets you need and can you develop them? And then what tasks would they do? So that's where you come up with a list of tasks that they actually would do. So know when to get help, advice, and support and guidance. So do something today that your future self will thank you for, because this stuff takes time to build out and it does get overwhelming. But as you see yourself getting less and less overwhelmed, your future self will thank you for it. By doing the stuff that I just talked about today, I have been able to take up to 3 weeks unplugged off from my business because I gave my team the information they needed, where they can make a decision and they own the outcome. And so you can do this in the future if you actually put the time in now, and to take that overwhelmed feeling away from yourself, because you just got to start with something little, and start 30 minutes a day and just something little. So this is what we actually work with accountants, bookkeepers on. And actually in our one-to-one meetings, we work through a lot of this stuff that we talk about, that I just talked about. We help you with pricing, task management, working through overwhelm, delegation, hire and team development, culture, and more from somebody that's been doing it. And then you get that, and then we're running a promotion through the end of December where you get a weekly group leadership call, ClickUp implementation, which is what we use for task management, and then a weekly group task management and processes Zoom call, a client needs analysis, and then we hold you accountable to actually start moving, and then support throughout the month. And then we make sure that you're working on it and check in with you, and then a Facebook community. And then you get access to my entire team, because I am not the best person at doing all the things. And back to where you need support, know where you need support. So you get access to my entire team that has their own experience and their own expertise. So for the month of December, we're running this where you get all of that for $19.79 per month. And that is through December. And if you're interested in that, you can take a picture of this QR code and you can apply, because we're very selective in who we actually let come in, because we want to make sure it's a good fit for you and not just be another overwhelming program that you have to do. And these are all live coaching sessions. So I wanted to leave some time for questions. So this is where, if you want to follow me on Facebook, LinkedIn, and this is my free Facebook group. So if you want to join our Facebook group, I welcome you to. I put a lot of training and content in that group as well. So I thank you for joining me, and I want to turn it over to Allison now for questions.
Yeah, we have a couple. They've been kind of building up, and I didn't think it was worth interrupting you because they were sort of like add-ons. So Marion was asking about confidence and um, how do you actually develop confidence? Like if you just feel like you're not confident and you're full of self-doubts, what are the ways that people can improve their confidence?
One of the ways I improved my confidence was listening to mindset podcasts. So one of my favorite ones is the Mindset Mentor, because we know more than we give ourselves credit for.
Yeah.
And so just working on your own mindset. And then this book, I talked about reading, Chill and Prosper, was another great read, by Denise Duffield Thomas. This is a great read on actually building your confidence and just taking action.
Yeah, and confidence, I want to add, for Marion and also thank you, Leslie. Um, Confidence doesn't mean you have to be like arrogant or it doesn't mean that at all. I think it just means understanding that you have skills that other people don't have. And that is great, right? And that is the way it's
Mm-hmm.
supposed to be, right? And you've got your training and you know what you're doing. And it's really okay for you to say, and this is the other thing, I think some people don't feel like it's all right for them to say, I am good at this.
Mm-hmm.
And so what I wanted to pass along was I was forced to do an exercise years ago when I worked at Intuit. And we had to come to a large meeting and say in 30 seconds or less, I do this better than I do X better than anyone else in the world. And it's a really good one for you to go through and say, what is my superpower? What am I good at? And you probably will have a lot of things that the other thing I love is that you can look at what your clients say about you
Mm-hmm.
because that's what's good as well. And then the other tip there, because I love this one so much, is if you tell someone else what you think they're good at and they tell you, that can be also, but you got to let it in, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yep. Okay. And then Mark said, how do you determine what is the best use of your time if you have too many things? And so I thought that was a good one because if you have too many things on your list, how do you teach people, Leslie, how to really determine what's the best use of their time in any given moment?
One of the things that we look at is getting everything in one place where you can actually see what all those things are. Because a lot of times it's not, if you feel like you're overwhelmed and you don't have all the time, a lot of it's because you're reacting to fires. So a
Yeah.
lot of it is to close down the fires. And I had somebody tell me, well, I'll check my email first thing in the morning. I'm like, don't ever check your email first thing in the morning, ever, 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 ever.
Bad
Um,
idea.
so check your, so have certain times to do things and
Yep.
give yourself a short window so you don't go down a rabbit hole.
Yeah.
So with my
Yeah.
email,
And
I'll give myself 15 minutes. That's it. That's all I got.
yeah, in and out and like task it, so that you can just get that out of your email inbox, out of your like some people will open emails and then close them. Don't do that. Task it. Um, and I think as far as understanding the best use of your time, what I would just add is what is the impact of doing that project or not doing it, right? And that's where that those glass balls and the plastic
Mm-hmm.
balls. Yeah. Yeah.
What is
So
going to bring you
folks,
the biggest value?
yeah, exactly. The biggest value. It's funny. I think there's a perspective also. We do love balancing our bank statements and doing those
Mm-hmm.
types of things. They're really fun. So the challenge is, if you really like that kind of work, you can reserve time to do it. Just don't let it take over the other things that you need to do, right? And definitely controlling the noise from clients and all the places that things are coming in, and that's where having a system, like a centralized system for everything to come in, like Lisio, would really help. But I loved your simple advice about it can be really simple. It could be an Excel spreadsheet, or it could be a Google Doc, or it can be, you don't have to have you don't have to, you use ClickUp, um, but you don't have to have something that's fancy and coded and everything to create. You could actually do it fairly simply. Um, so I really appreciate that. So, folks on the call, we have time for one or two more questions, but we're also okay ending and giving you back a few minutes. Um, I want to say there's a number of things that I wrote down. And one of the main thing, Leslie, is I'm going to do a brain dump of all the things that I've got. I'm looking at my desk and I've got all this paper of all these notes and things. I'm going to literally spend the next, half hour after this call, and I'm going to do a brain dump and get it all into, we use Asana at Lisio internally for the marketing team, and I'm going to just task all these things in Asana so I can get them out of my head, right? And that way you've got a list and you can have your evening and your weekend and you don't worry about like forgetting something. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. That was
All
the
right.
best thing I could have done.
Best thing you could have done. Yeah. Well, I really enjoyed this, Leslie. It went really fast and I really appreciate it. And we're going to be working together more on some other courses like this. So I'm super excited about that.
So am I.
So thank you, everyone. We're going to go ahead and end the webinar now. And Leslie, thank you so much again for sharing this. I actually feel less overwhelmed. I actually feel better. I
Awesome.
hope the folks on the call also feel the same. All right. Thanks,
Bye.
everyone. Bye.